Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Unearth Horticulture. Today and in the next episode, we're going to take a closer look at picking plants that work the best for you as a grower. I am a big believer in the fact that not only should you be collecting plants because they're really cool, but also because they work the best for you, because you're going to be setting yourself up for success by what plants you're picking. And if you've been to the plant bus, you know that I work with you to find plants that not only look cool to you, but also are suited to the environmental conditions where the plant's going to go, but also your growing style. So in the horticultural industry and in general, there's really two categories of growers. There's the dry grower and the neglectful grower. That is definitely the category I fall under, the people that tend to forget about their plants. And then on the other side, there is the wet grower, or the grower that is a little bit more smothering and overloves their plants. And y'all know who you are, and if you don't, you're welcome to reach out and I will help you discover what kind of grower you are. But I definitely fall under the category of dry grower. So we're gonna tackle that topic in this first episode, part 1 of part 2. And in the next episode, we're gonna talk about plants that are suited to the more overloving, passionate grower, the person that is just so adamant on wanting their plants to thrive that they're overdoing it a little bit. So neither of these are bad things. It's just something to be aware of so that you can tailor your plant collection to fit your needs and to make sure that you're successful. So we're going to take a look at plants that I think are suited to both categories of grower so that you can make more informed decisions in the future. All right, let's dive in. I have filled this dry sink on the sun porch with all kinds of plants that are perfect for the neglectful grower. And we're going to go through these in order of plants that like the brightest light to plants that like the lowest light. And that is because it's going to help you kind of think through in your mind. If you are a neglectful grower and you like any of these plants, think through where to put them, because watering is not the only factor involved here. Lighting is very important when it comes to plant success, right? So I'm always keeping that in mind. So we're going to do a little speed show and tell here. And as always, if you have questions about any of these plants, make sure you drop them in the comments below. But we're just going to hop in right here. The first category is the cacti. Cacti are probably the number one plant you think of when you think of plants that thrive off neglect, because they store all kinds of water in their stems. So I have this cute little rickrack cactus here and this cute little roadkill cactus. Both of these are favorite types of cactus for me, and that is why they are in my personal collection. I have both of them for sale on the bus right now. Cactus. They like the brighter light though, so keep that in mind. Moving right along. The next group is the succulents, and technically cacti are a type of succulents because they store water in their stems. But most of the time when we think about succulents, we're thinking about the ones that I'm holding in my hands right here. I have some kalanchoe and jade plants in this hand, and then I've got a little aloe Hoya hybrid here. The reason I selected these plants for neglect is because they not only tolerate a little bit lower light levels than other types of succulents like the Echeveria, they also tend to do a little bit better with dry down. Now, I know most succulents are built to survive dry conditions, but even Echeveria tend to be a little bit persnickety when it comes to dry down, so they can lose leaves pretty quickly. But jade plants, kalanchoes, aloes, and Hoyas really thrive off of that those dry growing conditions. So that's why I would suggest those as the top succulents to choose if you are in this category of grower. The next plant I want to talk about is the Hoyas, or the wax flowers. Hoyas are what we know as a semi-succulent. So they have this foliage, leafy appearance to them, but they actually store quite a bit of water in their leaves. If you ever notice their leaves turning a raisiny texture, then you know it's time to water them. I only water my Hoya about once a month, and in the winter every other month. So they can really handle dry down well. The thing that is the rub for most people is that they like that bright lighting. They do flower, and I'm going to show you an up close of the flowers, and you'll know why they get the name wax flower, because they're very waxy plants. But they do like those south or west facing windows. This one's a little Hoya carnosa. It's got that pink coloring in the new growth, which is really pretty, that blush color. Got a little Hoya australis lisa and a gracilis Hoya. There are so many different species and cultivars to collect in the Hoyas, it's not even funny. Actually, all of the plants I'm going to show you are highly collectible because oftentimes people lean on the neglecting side when they're growing houseplants. Go figure. The next group is also considered a semi-succulent type plant, and that is the Peperomias. Peperomias are my favorite plant. Well, I cannot say that. I cannot say they're my favorite houseplant. I say a different one all the time. But if I were to narrow it down to my top 5, I think Peperomias would make the list. They like medium light levels, so they don't need as much light as your Hoyas do, but they still need some indirect filtered bright light. This, my friends, is a pudiolata peperomia, a Peperomia pudiolata. Its common name is parallel peperomia, and you can see why. Its venation is parallel. And what you can't experience through the video camera, which is oh so sad to me, is the texture of the leaves. The leaf texture is super cardboard-like, and it almost feels fake. And I always love showing this to kids and making them feel it because it's like, whoa, that's a real plant. But I love pudiolata peperomias because they are probably the type of peperomia that thrives the most off neglect. There is what we call the permanent wilting point in the horticultural botanical world. And that permanent wilting point is this line that occurs, and once the plant passes that line in wilt, it can't recover. It can't bounce back up. And if you've killed a plant from neglect, which I'm sure you have, I have, you know what I'm talking about. There is a point that plants wilt to that they can't bounce back from. What makes this plant thrive from neglect is the fact that it has those cardboard-like leaves, which makes it less susceptible to passing that permanent wilting point. In fact, if it ever gets dry, usually it kind of turns like a raisin and drops leaves. It doesn't even really wilt per se, but that's what makes this plant do so well, is it has a very low permanent wilting point, a high tolerance to dry down. There are other types of peperomias out there. The baby rubber plant, or the Peperomia obtusifolia. There are a couple variations I have here. This one has kind of a cool variegation in the center of the leaf. This is a Ginny Peperomia. This type is the next most tolerant to the dry down as far as peperomias are concerned. And then kind of on an even playing field, I would consider the Peperomia caparata and the Peperomia argyria, or the watermelon peperomia. Both of these are kind of on an even playing field as far as tolerating dry down. They will look pretty floppy if they get dry, but they should stand right back up because they do have pretty succulent leaves to hold that moisture. There are a lot of caparata peperomias out there. This one's called Little Tuscany. There's one called Frost that has a little bit bigger leaves. There are ripple peperomias. There are piccolo banda peperomias, and then Peperomia rosso. It looks a lot like these and along those lines. All really fun plants. Next up on this journey is this guy up here. This is my Bokarnea recurvata. This is a ponytail palm, and they're so popular. They are definitely a party plant. I cannot keep these in my house because of cats. They definitely think this is a chew toy, and many of you may know what I'm talking about. But what makes this awesome is its succulent trunk. This is not a true palm in actuality. This is in the asparagus family, which I know, right? Super crazy and cool, that fun fact. But if you ever notice the trunk getting kind of soft, that could be a sign that it's drying out a little bit too much, or if you notice leaf tip burn. But in general, this plant does really well with only getting waterings about once per month. Next up on this tour is the snake plant. And of course I have this in the category here because snake plants are very tolerant to all kinds of light levels, but also they are very tolerant to droughty conditions, to those neglectful conditions. I have all kinds of varieties right here in my hand. None of these are what you might think of when you think of snake plants right away. They're not the common kinds. I like to collect really wacky looking snake plants. If I ever see a cool one, I just grab it because you can put them anywhere. They're great shelf plants in any room, corner plants, tabletop plants. They're really awesome things to have around. Common, maybe, but there are some new varieties that are less common to find around. This one's called Francisii, and I've got a few Asian hybrids right here. What makes snake plants drought tolerant is their rhizome in their soil, and a rhizome is just an underground stem, and it tends to store water. It's kind of a water storage organ, and that not only causes snake plants to really bust open their pots sometimes, it also helps them to undergo those long periods without water. I forgot one plant. In between snake plants and the Ponytail Palm is probably going to fall the Scindapsis or the Satin Pothos. I did not include the true pothos in this video, the Peperomias, because really they can go any direction with watering, whether they stay on the dry side or the wet side. But Scindapsis in particular, the Satin Pothos, have very thick leathery leaves and they like it on the drier side. So they're a lower light level plant that trails out of their pots, but they also can thrive off of a little bit of neglect. They don't mind staying on the drier side. I'm sure you're going to recognize this next plant. This is the ZZ plant, or the Zamioculcas zamiofolia. That's its full name. And the reason these are probably the #1 plant sold to beginner growers for houseplants is because they also have a rhizome in their soil that helps to spread them. So they can thrive off of low watering, but they're also the lowest light level plant as far as tolerance goes that I probably know, besides pothos. They come from a part of the world, Africa, where they go through wet, dry cycles rather than warm, cold cycles like we do here in the US. And so that makes them very tolerant to drought. ZZ plants. If you don't have one, you should get one because they are the perfect corner plants. The last plant I want to talk about that really doesn't belong in the overcare category, the moist plant category, is the air plants. And the reason I categorize it as a plant that you can neglect a little bit more is because they're not gonna just keel over and die if you forget to water them 1 week. In fact, they'd much rather be on the drier side than the wetter side. And the other reason is I tend to keep them in places that I easily remember to water them. So like in my kitchen windowsill, right there, when I'm washing the dishes, I think, oh yes, I need to water those plants. So that's another reason they're perfect for the neglectful grower, because you often put them in places where you remember to water them. I am holding this massive Xerographica right here, and Tillandsia is their genus name, and they're actually in the bromeliad family. So they grow epiphytically in nature. They grow without soil up in trees, and there are all kinds. This is the Xerographica, as mentioned. This is the curly slim. I've got all kinds of colors and textures that I have for sale on the bus. I just got a huge shipment in. This is Abdita red, so they color up in reds, peaches, lavenders, other bright oranges. So they come in all sizes. This is a little miniature Fuego Ianantha. They flower. I've got this really tassely looking Tillandsia that has a flower coming. And yeah, there's this Medusa one. There's all kinds. Air plants are just flat out cool. I really recommend trying them out. Now, if you're worried about forgetting about your air plant, I would mention that the bigger you go with the plant size, they're a little bit pricier, but the more forgiving they're going to be. And oftentimes that's most plants. The bigger the plant, the more forgiving on dry down the plant's going to be, simply because it's got more roots and more leaves to store water before it runs out of water. So that's just something to tuck away in your brain when you're thinking about the plants you're going to purchase. That's all I have for you in this episode. I'm not saying that these are the only plants that you can grow neglectfully, but there's certainly a good swath of them that you can choose from. If you ever have any questions, you're welcome to come to the plant bus and we'll pick out a plant together. I'm always really excited to help you find a plant that works for you, that thrives off neglect, that you can be successful with. If you're not a neglectful grower, if you tend to keep things on the moist side, the next episode is going to be for you. So make sure you stay tuned for that. As always, if you have questions, drop them in the comments below. And until next time, you've been watching Unearth Horticulture.